I'll never forget the day I looked out from my porch and realized my life had turned into a circus. Not the fun kind with popcorn and elephants, but the kind where you're the only one not in on the joke. I'm talking strangers everywhere, bright swimsuits and sun hats bobbing across my grass like it was their private resort. One woman in a neon pink bikini actually lounged in my late grandfather's favorite chair, the one he hand-carved, drinking some suspiciously green margarita from a plastic cup, chatting like she'd known my family her whole life. 3 teenagers were giggling and snapping selfies down by my dock, their parents spreading out a blanket on my freshly cut lawn. And get this, it wasn't even noon, and I'd already counted 5 different groups trampling across what used to be my sanctuary. Then right there at the center of it all, I saw her Karen. You know the type. She stood on the little wooden bridge that connected my peninsula to the neighborhood, arms folded, lips curled in this smug little grin. And when she caught my eye, she actually waved at me. Like we were sharing some inside joke, except I was the punchline. That was the moment I snapped. I'm Ben, and let me tell you, I'm not the kind who looks for trouble. I inherited this lakeside cabin 3 years ago when my grandfather passed a quiet slice of heaven at the end of a narrow spit with a bridge he built himself back in '65. For decades, it was just us and the occasional neighbor waving hello. That all changed when Karen moved in 6 months ago, immediately crowning herself president of the new HOA, as if the neighborhood was some kingdom in need of a queen. She's the sort who makes you nervous just by looking at you. Bleach blonde hair, perfect nails, a voice sharp enough to cut stone when things don't go her way. Within weeks, she'd convinced half the neighborhood that we needed to be, in her words, a destination spot for discerning tourists. At first, it was silly stuff. Everyone had to plant matching petunias. Then there were rules about grass height and what color your mailbox could be. I mostly ignored it. My property sat outside the HOA boundaries, something that drove Karen nuts. But then she discovered my lake access and dock, and overnight I became her favorite project. It started small. She'd drop hints at meetings about how our community has an underutilized lakefront, and wouldn't it be nice if everyone could enjoy the view? I reminded her gently that it was private property. She just laughed, said I should think of it as free advertising for when I wanted to sell, told me no one would bother me, they'd just pass through, snap a photo, and leave. Yeah, right. The next week I found a flyer in my mailbox for a guided neighborhood tour. My address was a must-see stop. I called her, keeping it civil, and she answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting. "Oh, Ben, don't be a stick in the mud," she sang. "The neighborhood needs you," I told her as firmly as I could to remove my property from her tour. She just sighed. "You're missing an opportunity, Ben. The community is finally getting recognized." Officially, the tours stopped, including my place, but Karen, she'd just lead her little groups down the road, wink, and tell everyone about the grumpy guy who doesn't like visitors. By the next month, it was a flood. Weekends brought families with coolers, selfie sticks, even a few folks dragging inflatable kayaks down to my dock like it was a public launch. They walked past my private property signs like they were written in invisible ink. The last straw was coming home from a business trip to find trash everywhere, beer cans bobbing in the lake, and a family of raccoons having a picnic on my deck. My neighbor Frank, who's older than dirt and twice as salty, just shook his head and muttered, "Karen's been parading them through here in droves. Tells them it's a public access, that you're just some old hermit hoarding the lake." I'd had enough. At the next HOA meeting, I stood up in front of a packed room, half of them Karen's fan club, the other half folks just tired of the circus. I laid it out plain. This has to stop. My property's getting trashed. Wildlife disturb trespassers every day. Karen just gave me this syrupy smile, slow and patient, like I was a stubborn child. "Tourism brings value." "Ben," she purred, "maybe if you were more welcoming, folks would respect your space. Besides that, bridge is basically a landmark. People have a right to appreciate local history." Her cronies nodded along, and I realized she'd already poisoned the well. It got worse from there. Karen started posting photos of my dock online, hidden gem, perfect for afternoon picnics. She talked short-term rental hosts into advertising scenic lake access in their listings. Every morning I'd find new damaged, trampled plants, garbage, and once, I kid you not, a bonfire built out of my driftwood collection. The police, bless them, were sympathetic, but said without catching anyone in the act, there wasn't much they could do. Karen, meanwhile, kept gaslighting me. "You're paranoid, Ben," she'd say. "I can't control tourists. Maybe use more friendly signage, like it was my fault." That's when I did some digging. I spent hours at the county registrar poring over dusty maps and property deeds. What I found was gold. Not only was the bridge on my land, but every inch was private. My grandfather built it with his own two hands, never gave up public access, never signed an easement. Legally, every person crossing it without my okay was trespassing. So I called my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah who knows her stuff. Then I hired a construction crew. 3 days later at dawn, my property had a new steel gate across the bridge, complete with cameras, motion sensors, and a keypad. Signs everywhere, private property. No trespassing. Violators prosecuted. Cease and desist letters went out to Karen and the HOA. I made a pot of coffee, sat back on my porch, and waited. Didn't have to wait long. By 8 a.m., Karen herself showed up, leading a tour group megaphone in hand, bright yellow sundress flapping. She marched right up to the new gate and just about choked when she realized it wouldn't budge. Her face turned every color in the Crayola box. She spotted the security camera, jabbed the intercom button, and barked, "Ben, open this gate. You can't block public access." I took my sweet time answering, then told her, nice and calm, "Sorry, Karen, this is private property. You and your group need to leave." What happened next was glorious. Karen had a meltdown you could hear from 3 blocks away, screaming about community rights, historic access, threatening to call her lawyer. Her tourists looked ready to mutiny, some demanded refunds right then and there. After that, the phone rang off the hook. Board members yelling, some secretly cheering me on. I ignored them all, spent the morning fishing on my now quiet dock. Karen called an emergency HOA meeting that night, packed. The room ranted about my hostile takeover. I walked in with Sarah, who brought every deed survey and tax record since the 1960s. She laid it out simple. This bridge is private property. The HOA is at risk for promoting unauthorized access. You could hear a pin drop as the board realized Karen might have just cost them their insurance. The lawyer the HOA hired looked like he'd swallowed a frog. In less than an hour, the board voted to stop promoting my property, issued a public apology, and formally censured Karen for overstepping her authority. But she wouldn't quit. The next week, she tried every trick in the book, complained to the county, called the fire chief, who checked the gate, found it up to code, even tried to get the Historical Society involved. They laughed her out of the building when she couldn't prove anything. Her last stand was a protest at my bridge, a dozen folks with homemade signs demanding public lake access. I just set up speakers and blasted classical music. They left after an hour, grumbling. Meanwhile, short-term rental hosts started coming to me, apologizing for backing Karen and asking if there was any way their guests could have access. I said, maybe if you vote her out and put in someone with common sense. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what happened. A local news crew got wind of the story. HOA president tries to steal private lake access, made for great TV. Tourists complained about being scammed. Neighbors outed Karen for bullying. She wouldn't go on camera, but her real estate client saw the news and bailed. The state board opened an ethics investigation over her listing photos. 3 months after the gate went up, the HOA called a vote of no confidence. Karen came in looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. Out of 43-37 voted to kick her out. 5 just wanted the drama to stop, and only her bestie voted to keep her. Karen stood, hissed something about regretting this when property values tanked, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. You'd think that would be the end, but it got better. My lawyer hit her with a civil suit for damages and harassment. The real estate board suspended her license for 2 years, fined her $15,000. The day she got the letter, neighbors said they heard her scream from 3 houses over. Within a week, she put her place up for sale at a loss because no one wanted to live where she'd poisoned the well. Last I saw of her was at the title office, hands shaking as she signed the papers, avoiding everyone's eyes. Now my lake is peaceful again. The bridge stands quiet, just like my grandfather built it, and sometimes I sit out on the porch at sunset, coffee in hand, listening to nothing but the frogs and the wind, and, I wonder if that's what real justice feels like. But hey, some folks still think I went too far, or maybe not far enough. What do you think is standing up for your rights worth making some enemies? Drop your thoughts below, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the line between neighbor and nuisance is thinner than you think.